What's up, gangsters? How about a build review? Yes, that's right. It seems like I rarely do these much anymore. But I am into a new project and it's time for my traditional part one of my usual two-part build reviews. Now, in this particular case, with the Arma Hobby 172nd Mustang, I actually did a sort of an unboxing review of this thing about a month ago. And that's cool, it's great. I mean, I was super excited, so I wanted to do that, even though it's something that I rarely do, because if you watch much of my nonsense, you know that I have a low opinion of unboxing reviews of model kits, and that includes my own, because they honestly just don't tell you much. I mean, yeah, you get a good look at what's on the sprues, but you get some idea of the engineering, but you really have no idea whether or not it is actually a really good kit, because that doesn't come until you get into the nitty-gritty of building the thing. So that's what we're going to do now. What I like to do with these is, once I get a little bit, a little ways into the build, and I kind of start to see what the flavor is and how it's going to go together, that's when I like to do part one of the build review. So that's what this is, and without further jaw flapping on my part, let's get right to it. Okay, let's see where we are at with this thing. There's honestly not a lot left of the sprues. This is the current pile of stuff that we'll take a look at. The other sprue is still pretty much intact because I just haven't needed much of this stuff yet, but you can see that I've started to do a little bit of priming. So anyway, let's just start at the usual place with the cockpit. I gotta say, having now gone through the instructions, and not just looked at them and said, oh, hey, these look good, I really do think this is a good instruction set. I mean, it's busy. It's a small booklet and it's busy, but they've done a really good job laying it out and giving you the information. I really like that they're very explicit about what to use or not use for different painting options. And so that made it easy for me to go through and just mark out the stuff that I could ignore and only focus on the parts that really mattered. So good on them for that. So let's take a look at the actual cockpit. It is so tiny, 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 tiny. And here it is. Yeah, I'm honestly pretty happy with the way this is turning out for my first ever 1/72nd scale cockpit. I really did not have any trouble putting it together. They've done a really good job of the tolerancing on this thing, and the engineering overall is really good. But there were two things about this subassembly that I ran into that I felt like, could have been done better. One is all of these radio gizmos here on the top. They don't really have great location features on this green rack thing right here. And you can tell because mine are perhaps a little bit crooked. And if this were a bubble top Mustang, I'd be a bit annoyed by that because I wouldn't want that to show. But fortunately, the only one that really matters is this one in the front. That's the only one you're really going to be able to see through the side window in the fuselage. And it located okay. One other issue is that with this rack itself, okay, and let me see if it shows this in the instructions. No. Okay, so right here, all right, let's see if I can get this. Okay, right here, all right, see the end of the rack? It's got that cross piece, and I think you can kind of just tell, I mean, if you ever built a Mustang, you can tell that the end of the rack right there has to go in between the sides of this A-frame looking fuselage frame thing, armor plate frame, whatever the heck that thing is. In order for this all to work, the front of that rack has to fit in between the sides of that A-frame looking thing. And it did not, because there were a couple of little nubs sticking out of each side of of the front of that frame part where that cross member was, and it just wouldn't go in there. And it, that was obviously a real easy fix. I just clipped off those two little nubs. But the fact that you don't see them in the instruction sheet kind of makes me wonder where they came from. I mean, I think it's, maybe a tooling error. I don't know, but yeah, that was a little bit of an issue. So if you find that yours will not go in there correctly, and that when you try to position it the way that it's supposed to position, because the positioning of the rack itself is very definitive. It's got pins on the bottom and there's holes in the top of the fuel tank, and it drops right on there. So there's no doubt about where it's supposed to go, and it's pretty easy to know that this A-frame looking thing should be vertical with respect to the floor of the cockpit. So if you find that it won't work, just look at the end of that rack part and you'll probably see that. Anyway, that was all good. Everything else went together great. One thing I really liked is the photo etch seat belts. This photo etch is really nice and soft. There's no need to anneal it. It'd be nice if there was more room between the fret and the part so that you could get nippers in there. I like to use the Xuron 9180 PE shears, but there's not, but it doesn't really matter because this brass is so soft that it cuts easily with a scalpel blade. Now, they recommend these belts right here for the old style wooden seat, but I used the other one because it was easier and I thought it looked just fine. It's really basically the same. Anyway, I liked it. It was easy to kind of give them a little bit of shape. And I just feel like that turned out really well. I was really dreading painting those, but turned out not to be too bad. Now, having said that, I think all of it is irrelevant because in our interview with Greg from Arma on Sprue Cutters Union, he said that they're not going to put this photo etch in the kit anymore, which is a real bummer. I mean, I understand costs and everything, but I don't think anybody out there who builds this thing would object to paying a little more to get this photo etch in the kit. It's just, it's nice. And especially given that the decals are not great. And we'll talk, let me be clear. The seatbelt decals, let me show you. Because the decals overall are, in fact, great. They're wonderful. But the seatbelt decals, yeah, they're a weird color. And I don't know if what they're intending for you to do, I think, based on the instruction sheet, what they think you're going to do is put these on top of the photo etch and not have to paint it. And I don't know that that's going to work well for anybody. But regardless, they're just the wrong color. So that's why I say that those decals don't work. Certainly, they just wouldn't work for me. But we'll get back to the quality of the decals themselves momentarily. They are fantastic. So, let me show you also. Here's the instrument cluster, and that's where you got to see the instrument panel decal. It went on really nicely, conformed really well. There's actually two of them. One for the main instrument panel and then one for that center console thing. And there's a little piece of photo etch right there on that little bit that sticks out at the bottom of that console. It's so tiny. Anyway, it was a little difficult to get that instrument panel decal positioned perfectly. I'm a little bit off, but doesn't really show. So not too big of a deal, but you do have to be careful with that. Now, speaking of the rest of the cockpit, we'll get to that in a minute, but since I've already got the fuselage taped together because I've been doing some test fitting, let me switch gears real quick and show you that part. The fit here between the wing and the fuselage is really nice. drops right in there in typical Mustang fashion, and you've got that joint in that panel right there, which I think we're all probably going to just automatically want to fill and smooth that. If you look really closely at reference photos of Mustangs, there's actually a weld right there that has usually been smoothed over on that panel. That's that access panel that's right there in front of the wing root. This one right here next to my fingernail. Anyway, you can see that it does, though, in fact, fit really, really nicely. And the wing root especially is really nice and tight. You can get a good look at that right there. So that's good to not have to do much, if anything, there. You know, those are separate pieces of sheet aluminum that make up that fillet. It's a cover that goes on there after the wing is bolted to the fuselage. So there is a line there. There is a panel line there, but obviously you don't want it to be enormous. So anyway, that's all good. Let's talk about the wing for a second, because as you can see, I've been doing a lot of body work. And this is the only other thing about the kit that I would say that I don't like. And this is, you know, to be fair, this is not an issue just with Arma. It's an issue with basically every Mustang kit out there, because none of them are giving us the correctly filled wings. And I know, okay, there's going to be people who are going to argue that, oh, well, model makers like the surface detail. Well, yeah, of course we do. We love that. But do we like it if it's wrong? And let's be 100% clear. It is wrong if the panel lines are showing on the front 40% of the wing, because all Mustangs, going clear back to the A model Mustang, had that front 40% of the wings filled with putty, smoothed, sanded, primered. There were several layers of primer, including some zinc chromate. Basically, the filler was a red Acme filler putty. Then there was zinc chromate yellow on top of that, or zinc chromate green, you know, different shades of it. Then on the front part and over here, there was a gray primer on top of that. So you had like 3 layers, which can result in some really interesting chipping at the wing root that I think I'm going to try to do on this. But at any rate, that's how they came out of the factory. And I feel like that since, you know, I think, I don't know, I think most of us want the thing to be correct. Yeah, sure, there were some that had the paint and putty stripped off of the wings out in the field, and the rivets would show, maybe sometimes on later model Mustangs, but that's the rare case. And I feel like that the model makers who want to depict that, if they're that tuned in to that level of detail, then they're probably also the kind of model maker who's okay with describing the detail themselves. The rest of us, yeah, having, you know, if you're not really that tuned in, then, you know, you don't care, right? And a simple explanation in the instruction sheet about why there's no surface detail right there should cover it. And that saves all the rest of us from having to do the ubiquitous Mustang wing body work, which involves filling and sanding and filling and sanding. Now in this case, because they are super skinny panel lines, I chose to just use my goopy old all-clad ALC 309 microfiller primer. This stuff went bad on me, and the microfiller agglomerated, turned into gravel, and I sprayed it one day, and it was just looked like sandpaper on the model surface. So I'll never trust it for that again, but I discovered kind of by accident that as a lightweight brush-on lacquer filler, it's fantastic. Like, I would fight to the death to protect this little bottle of the stuff. And I think it'll last me for a long time, because one of the great things is you can use a little bitty tiny brush to just apply where you want it. So I went along in all these panel lines and used that. It dries in like half an hour. It sands really well, like any lacquer filler will. It's basically a super thin version of like Bondo 907 or Combi, and so it's super easy to work with. And then once I got that where I felt like I was good, then I come back and just spray a nice heavy layer of Mr. Surfacer 1500 and then sand that down. And I try not to over sand. Generally, when you start to see ghost seams, it's when you go clear down to the plastic and you make it look like that. And there's just nothing on top there to sort of separate the two surfaces. The two surfaces being the plastic and the top of the filler that's in the panel line. Now, having said all that, even though I'm pretty happy with the way that these panel lines look right now, I'm under no illusions. In 2 weeks, I could still have ghost seams because that's just what lacquers and plastic sometimes do. So, we'll see. At any rate, this wing went together really good. I had a little bit of trouble here in the middle getting the gap, getting it to close up at the leading edge right there, basically between the guns and the wing root. It wasn't because there was really a problem. It's just you can see that the entire top wing is one piece and the entire bottom wing is one piece. And there wasn't an interference with the gear bay pieces, kind of like you sometimes get with the Edward 148 Mustangs, but it was just because you've got these long skinny pieces and they come out of the mold and they're not exactly the same shape, and so getting them to conform to each other just meant that I had to keep some pressure on that. And I basically just ended up doing the trick of sticking it with super glue and kicker and then wicking some extra thin in there for the real weld. You can see I kind of got a little bit more on the starboard side. There was a little bit of a gap there, but it does not seem to have translated to any effect on the important thing, which is how it fits with the fuselage. So I think it's all good there. It's a little bit tight on that side, but otherwise, when I put some pressure on there, I think you'll agree that joint looks just fine. Looks really good. So that's that. Now, you can see I've got a kind of a multicolor thing going on here in the wheel bay. And, there's a number of combinations that are valid with colors in the wheel bay. They give you what is sort of the standard recommendation in the instructions, which is to have the lateral stiffeners be zinc chromate yellow or green, and the rest of it be aluminum, which is totally valid. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a pain in the butt to mask, though. And but again, it's not wrong because the sealing of this gear bay is just the underside of the top of the wing surface. And so it often was aluminum, but these stiffeners that run fore to aft, these ribs, whatever you want to call them, they could be bare aluminum or they could be painted, and they were typically painted separately from the other pieces. So it was not unusual to see different shades of green for the rear bulkhead of the wheel bay, the stiffeners, and then it was also not unusual on earlier Mustangs, like this is a B model or a C model. I don't know where it was, if this one was built in Inglewood or Dallas, but for the underside or for the ceiling of the wheel bay to also be painted. And then that centerpiece, yet another shade. So, I like to add visual interest by mixing and matching. And I'm doing Ding Hao. And there's actually one of the few photos that actually shows much wheel bay color is a color photo of that aircraft, and the light is just such that you can kind of see into the wheel bay, and it's pretty clear that at a minimum the rear bulkhead is zinc chromate yellow. And the ribs probably also are. It's kind of hard to tell. I think you could also argue for them being bare aluminum, but nobody's ever going to know what color the ceiling was of that gear bay. And so I punted. I took the easy way out to not have to do all the masking. And part of the reason is because it was also really common for the inner wheel doors on Mustangs to be either mostly or partially closed while the aircraft was on the ground. You know, pretty much every model kit has you build it with the doors all the way down. And that wasn't uncommon either, but that was basically a result of the hydraulic pressure bleeding off the system and allowing the doors to droop. The way that Mustang doors work is when they open up, they open up completely. The wheels come down, and then the inner doors close back up, and it does the reverse of that on takeoff. And when it's on the ground and there's no hydraulics going, then the doors can droop along with the flaps, because we all know Mustang flaps are always pretty much drooped. So at any rate, that's the deal with the doors and the wheel bay colors. I haven't totally decided. Well, I guess yes, I have. What color to paint the inner sides of the doors. Doesn't matter a whole lot, because again, I'm going to model them as mostly and partially closed. And so it doesn't really matter. They won't be that visible. But again, you'll see different combinations. Sometimes, rarely, you'll see the whole door painted. Sometimes you'll see the outside parts of the door painted, and then this strip, which is a kick plate made out of stainless steel, not painted. Or you'll see the reverse, where the kick plate had a zinc chromate conversion coating on it. It's not really paint, it's a chemical treatment. And it was greenish brown, and the rest of the door was aluminum. And I think that's probably the version that I'm gonna do. But what that kick plate was for was, if necessary, the tire would rub against it and push that door open. And they put that stainless steel plate there just as extra protection so that the aluminum door skin didn't get jacked up. So that's that. Now, since we've had a look at the fit of the wing and the fuselage, let me take this apart and we'll have a look inside the fuselage. Wait, actually, before I completely take this apart, let me show you another thing that I think is really just genius that these guys did, and that's the way that the tail goes together. This is super cool. So what happens is you've got this opening and this drops in there like that. And you can see that's a nice fit. And assuming, you know, that everything is correct, it's just you're automatically going to have a tailplane that is the same on both sides. And we all know that if you're going to go to an IPMS contest, your tailplane has to be perfectly level, right? So anyway, then the vertical stabilizer then drops on there like that. Matt McDougall found a little bit of an issue, and I haven't really gotten into it yet to see if it applies to mine too. But there's a little bit of a fit thing going on with that joint there with the vertical stabilizer. I think he was a little concerned about the way the bottom of the rudder is, but that doesn't really matter because it's the rudder. It's separate from the fuselage. At any rate, I think it's brilliant. I think everybody at every scale should do Mustang tails like this. Not just Mustang tails, but every tail out there, because we all know that it's one of the worst engineered areas on model aircraft kits, and I still don't understand why. But that is also how you get the different versions of the tail, because there were quite a few B and C model Mustangs that had the filleted tail. They had it either from the factory or added in the field. And if you're going to model one of those versions, they give you the other horizontal stabilizer so that you can do that. And again, I really respect the engineering on that. I think it's very good. But at any rate, let me get this last piece of tape off here, and we'll have a look inside because the inside, I mean, look, all of the detail on this thing is just really good. But you really, get to appreciate that with the cockpit. It's just so nicely done. And you can see there on the starboard side, that separate piece that's got the oxygen regulator and the hose. That's a nice touch, and the molding on that is really good. You can see the ribs on the hose there. Just really, really nicely done. Then on the opposite side, you've got the piece that represents that side console thing that's got the all of the trim tab adjusting wheels and the landing gear, that red thing. That's a separate piece, so that makes it easy to deal with that. The throttle quadrant, also a separate piece, and both of those pieces just dropped straight in there. Really, really good fit and well toleranced. I did not have to fuss with anything other than what I've already mentioned. And that's great, because with little tiny pieces like this that you've already painted, you shouldn't have to argue with them to get them in there, because it's obviously super high stress. And the penalty is high if you've already got it painted and decaled. And I want to talk about that because there's a bunch of decals in this cockpit, and it's really great. I mean, the Mustang cockpits are littered with stencils and placards, and it adds a lot of authenticity. And they did a good job with those. Some of them are a little bit out of whack, a little off register, but they're so tiny, it's hard to be mad at them for that. But one thing that I really, really like is if you look at these, there's some sort of instruments here. Let me get a pointer because this stuff is so tiny. But right here, okay, I believe this is a radio console right there, okay? And then these things right next to it that are black. So what they did, and I'll show you, because with all of these super tiny little decals where the opportunity to fuck them up is really high, I think we all wish for extras. Well, these guys are model makers and they know that. And so look, you get 2 sets and it's fantastic. I don't know if they intended to give you extras in case you messed up, but that's how it turns out, and I love it. Again, this is something that I wish that they all would do. But you can see, okay, so this is kind of the standard thing. Like right here, you can see K1 is just all of the red and white and some of the black placard stuff for the instrument panel and the center console. And then, let's see, I think I must have, maybe I used both of the ones for this little radio thing. At any rate, the point that I'm trying to make is, okay, there's one on this side, okay, right here behind the throttle quadrant, right there. I don't think that's going to focus. Right here behind the throttle quadrant, that decal, look at it in the instruction sheet, so it's a little easier to see which one it is. Okay, it is this decal K18. It is, just like it appears here, completely black with white markings, and that's fantastic, because it saves you having to paint that area right there. But it gets a little confusing, because then you look at over here at decal K21, decal K19, and it looks like from the instructions that they are also black backing with white markings, and they're not. The decal in like both of these, K19 and K21, is nothing but the white part. And like with K21, there's a little raised area right there that you have to flow some black paint into. And it's a high penalty, high probability of failure kind of operation. I managed to get it done, but just to put it in perspective, there it is, life size. And what they want you to do is put paint in that sort of trapezoidal area and then put the decal on top of it so that the white markings show up. And I really wish that they would just make all of these the way that they made this K18 decal, where it's got the black on there for you. And that to me, that includes even the instrument panel, because your life would just be so much easier if it was black. Like, for all of the ones in here, if they were black background with white and red markings, you wouldn't have to pre-paint any of those little areas black. It would just be, again, a much more modeler friendly thing. And it's kind of confusing to me, given how intelligently everything else is done, and how much, modeler friendly stuff it happens in this kit, that they chose not to do that. And maybe there are reasons that I just don't have visibility to, but at any rate, that was my only beef with the decals. As far as applying them goes, holy shit, these are fantastic decals. My standard thing with little bitty things like this, where they have a tendency to silver because they're like 90% clear film and they're so tiny, is that I use Mr. Mark Setter because it's got an adhesive component in it. And I put a little bit of that on the surface of the model first and then drop the decal on it. And once I'm sure it's in position, I just leave it alone. And that works great. All of these decals were done either directly on the MRP paint, or in some cases, I had reasons where I needed to apply a layer of MRP super clear matte before I did the decals because of the order that I was doing paint and washes. And then I ended up putting these little bitty tiny decals directly on top of that super clear matte. And once again, laying waste to the claim that you must have a gloss surface for decals, because no. And they just, all of them went on beautifully. Not a single issue with the actual application of any of these decals, which of course, when they're so tiny and the penalty is so high, is really something that, as model makers, I know we're all grateful for. So just really, really good stuff. If everybody out there in model kit manufacturing land could make their decals as good as these, what a wonderful world it would be. But at any rate, that's where I'm at. I'm not too far away from buttoning up the fuselage. They want you to put they don't want you to. You have to put the tail wheel in before you join the fuselage halves, which is a little bit of a hassle because obviously you got to deal with that thing sticking out for the whole rest of the time. And, there's that fear of breaking it off, but hey, it is what it is. Not a lot of different ways to do that. But I also want to call out this area right here where the radiator and the oil cooler are. That whole thing, really well designed, really well engineered, fits really good. Same, as this does. This whole little sub-assembly drops in here very nicely. The locating pins are all, again, just really well toleranced. Just good engineering, good design. Again, these guys are model makers, and it shows in the way that they've handled almost all of this stuff. So, yeah, good stuff. Okay, so of course I got into editing and discovered that there was something that I forgot, as always. And I think this is important if you're thinking about building this kit, that you would want to know. So take a look, hopefully this will focus up. Take a look at the crosshatch pattern on these tires. you can see pretty clearly that there's a mismatch in the alignment from one side to the other. And I'm not the only one that's noticed this, so I think, it's just a tooling problem, and there's nothing for it. I mean, that's not an easy fix in the steel. So I don't know that it's fair to demand that Arma go and fix this. It is a difficult thing to repair effectively. I've been working on doing it because I am entering this thing, building this for the Musaru Cup, which is a contest between podcasts, and the rules dictate that I have to use the parts that are in the box. So I cannot go get aftermarket resin wheels or design and print my own, but if you're building this kit, you may choose to because of this issue. So at any rate, I hate to end this video segment on a bad note, but this is not terrible. This is not an end of the world kind of problem, and I just really feel like it's important for you guys to know. And I try to be thorough and give you all the straight scoop. So there you go, part 1, Arma Hobby 1/72nd scale Mustang, a new thing for me to build in Braille scale. And it is indeed a tiny little thing, but it is big fun. And hopefully you can see from this review that if you're already into 1/72nd scale, that it's going to be cool. If you're looking to get into 1/72nd scale, that this is a good way to start. So at any rate, I hope that you guys found that informative. And as always, I appreciate you watching. Much love.